That morning at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, no one knew that in just 2 minutes, the laws of physics would be broken, time would bend, and the USS Eldridge would disappear forever. But the truly terrifying part is this: the ship didn't disappear. It just went somewhere else, and what it brought back was darker than any of us could ever imagine. October 28th, 1943, 4:23 a.m. Samuel Reeves' hands were shaking. He was working in the depths of the Philadelphia Navy Yard, in a basement no one knew about, under red lights. He hadn't slept in 72 hours, and his eyes were bloodshot. On his desk lay formulas that no ordinary person could understand. Reeves was no ordinary man. He had worked with Einstein at Princeton. He knew that the equations in his hands could change the world forever, or destroy it. He whispered to himself, "God, what are we doing?" His coffee cup had grown cold in his hand. He no longer knew how many cups he had drunk. On the upper floor of the shipyard, Colonel Marcus Webb was holding a secret meeting. There were only 3 people in the room: Webb, Dr. Elizabeth Crane, and a mysterious man whose identity was unknown. This man was known as Mr. X. Mr. X asked in a hoarse, cold voice, "Is Reeves ready?" Dr. Crane then opened her file. "Theoretically, everything is perfect, but in practice, no one knows." Webb's voice hardened. "No one knows? Our soldiers are dying out there. The Germans are finding our submarines with radar. We've spent millions on this project," he replied. Mr. X stood up and looked out the window toward the USS Eldridge. "Is the ship's crew aware of the situation?" Crane replied, "No, we only told them it was a special radar test." A cold smile appeared on Mr. X's lips. "Good. Sometimes ignorance is better." On the deck of the USS Eldridge, Seaman First Class Marcus Mack and Rodriguez were on morning watch together. There was unusual activity on the normally quiet Delaware River. Fish were swimming on the surface of the water, lifeless. "Hey, Tony!" he called out to his friend, Tony Castellano. "Look at those fish! What happened to them?" Castellano looked toward the Delaware River. His face turned pale with shock. "Mac, they're not dead. They look like they're unconscious." Rodriguez replied, "Do fish ever pass out?" Castellano, "I don't know, but I feel the same way. It's like there's electricity in the air." He replied, but a strange throbbing had started in Rodriguez's head. Ever since those metal boxes had been loaded onto the ship a few days ago, everyone had been feeling a headache. In the ship's hold, machine technician Jake Morrison and David Kumar were conducting final checks on the mysterious equipment. Large metal coils, thick cables, and machines that were constantly heating up. Morrison pointed to one of the coils inside the boxes and said, "David, do you know what this thing is?" David replied, "I don't know, but don't touch it. Roberts touched it yesterday, and his hand went numb for hours." Morrison asked, "What about that sound? Can you hear it?" A faint humming sound was coming from the depths of the ship, almost inaudible. It sounded like the ship was breathing. "This isn't normal, Mac. This isn't normal." In the basement, Dr. Reeves had finished his final calculations on the formulas, but the fear inside him was growing. The formulas were correct. The theories were perfect. But something was missing. He reread Einstein's final letter. "Samuel, the unified field theory is not just mathematics. It is playing with the rules of the universe. Be careful. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." Reeves had realized something significant. The clock on the wall had stopped. It was 8:15, but his wristwatch was still ticking. The shipyard commander, Admiral Patterson, boarded the ship one last time and addressed the crew. "Young men, today you will perform a historic mission. However, do not panic at what you see or hear." Sailor Rodriguez asked, "Commander, what kind of things will we see?" Patterson remained silent for a moment before responding, "I hope we see nothing." The atmosphere in the sky began to change. There was no wind, but the waves were violent. The birds seemed to be flying away, screaming. Dr. Crane was performing his final checks, but he saw something unexpected. Strange numbers appeared and disappeared on the screens. Technician Miller said, "Doctor, there's something strange with the magnetic field readings." The doctor replied, "What kind of anomaly?" "It's as if there's another power source beneath the ship." Crane was surprised by this, as it was an unplanned situation. The electrical charge in the air was making everyone's hair stand on end. Colonel Webb asked, "Are you ready?" Reeves couldn't speak. His throat was dry. The crew on the USS Eldridge's deck had taken their final positions. Rodriguez, Morrison, Kumar, Castellano. None of them knew that they were living their last normal minutes. There were only 2 minutes left until 9:47 a.m. The Delaware River was in a very strange state. There were no waves or sounds, as if it were waiting for something. This wait was terrifying. Dr. Franklin was clinging tightly to the control panel. His eyes were fixed on the gauges in front of him. "Power level 30%, 40, 50. The sailors standing on the deck of the USS Eldridge felt a strange sensation under their feet. It was as if the ship was floating in empty space rather than on the waves. Bradley looked at his friend Morrison. "This isn't normal, Jake," he said. Morrison's face had turned pale. "The water beneath the ship is changing." "What do you think this anomaly signifies? Is this just the beginning, or is it a sign of something else?" 30 seconds later, the colors began to change. The USS Eldridge's steel hull was first covered in a faint blue glow. Then the glow turned green, from green to purple, from purple to an indescribable color. The observers on the pier watched in astonishment. The cameras were rolling, but the lenses couldn't capture what they were seeing. "Naval officer, what's happening?" he shouted. "Dr. Wells, the magnetic field has exceeded normal limits. This is impossible," he shouted. Inside the ship, Chief Engineer Chen was losing control. All the gauges were moving wildly. The engine sounds had turned into tones he had never heard before. Exactly 1 minute later, the first casualty occurred. Sailor Martinez, who was standing on the deck talking to his friends, suddenly stopped. "Martinez? Martinez!" shouted the sailor next to him. But Martinez didn't seem to hear them. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. And then he started acting as if he wasn't there. It was as if he was slowly becoming transparent. "Captain!" shouted a sailor. "Something's happening to Martinez!" 30 seconds after the experiment, Dr. Franklin looked at his watch and was shocked. The second hand had stopped, but everything around him was moving. On the deck of the ship, some sailors were moving at normal speed. Some had slowed down as if in slow motion, and others had sped up. Wells shouted, "This is impossible! Time cannot be relative at this level!" But it was happening. Not only was the USS Eldridge invisible, it seemed to have stopped in time. The observers on the pier couldn't believe what they were seeing. The images captured by the cameras were beyond the limits of human comprehension. After 2 minutes, the sounds began to change. The sailors' shouts turned into strange echoes. It was as if the sounds were coming from different dimensions. Sometimes they seemed to come from very far away, and other times they were right next to their ears. Sailor Bradley was trying to find his friend. "Jake! Jake, where are you?" But Jake Morrison, even though he was only 3 meters away, couldn't hear Bradley. It was as if there was an invisible wall between them. Commander Hayes was starting to panic. The radio wasn't working. More accurately, it was working but was tuned to the wrong frequency. 2.5 minutes later, reality began to be questioned. Some parts of the USS Eldridge had become completely transparent. The inside of the ship could be seen from the dock, but the people inside, they were changing too. Dr. Franklin watched in horror. "Stop the experiment! Stop it immediately!" Wells looked at the control panel. "I can't stop it. I've lost control," he said. The generators continued to operate as if they had gained a will of their own. The power levels were much higher than planned. The USS Eldridge was no longer the same ship. Its steel hull seemed to have transformed into an organic substance. It was moving, breathing. The sailors could feel this transformation in their own bodies. Chief Engineer Chen stood in the engine room, filled with fear. The machines were no longer making the familiar sounds he knew. They were now emitting foreign noises. The machines have come to life. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. The USS Eldridge slowly began to slip into another dimension. The ship's lines became blurred. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. The observers on the pier couldn't believe their eyes. The ship is disappearing!" shouted a technician. Dr. Franklin tried his last resort. "Emergency stop, now!" But it was too late. The USS Eldridge had already crossed the boundaries of physics. The last radio message from the ship was one of the most terrifying sounds ever heard. Commander Hayes' voice sounded as if it were coming from very far away. "Mayday! Mayday! Here, Strange things are happening here. My crew, they—" Then the sound ceased, and silence fell. The USS Eldridge had completely vanished from sight. The USS Eldridge was no longer part of this world. The observers on the pier stared out at the empty sea. Where the ship had been, there was only a green mist. It swirled, twisted, and seemed to breathe. Dr. Franklin had collapsed to his knees. The greatest achievement of his 20-year career had also become his worst nightmare. "What have we done? God, what have we done?" he whispered. Dr. Wells was looking at the measuring devices. All the gauges were spinning wildly. The magnetic field is still active, but the ship is gone. How is this possible? The USS Eldridge was both there and not there at the same time. The crew was standing on the deck of the ship, but they could no longer see the Philadelphia Naval Yard. Around them, there was nothing. Sailor Bradley was trying to find his friend Morrison. "Jake! Jake, where are you?" His voice echoed as if he were miles away, but Morrison was only 2 meters away. "Tom, is that you? I can't see you, but I can hear you." They were both there, but at the same time in different places. It was as if dimensions had collided. The most terrifying thing was the changes happening to the crew. Sailor Martinez was standing on the deck, but half of his body was fused with the ship's steel hull. His feet had disappeared into the steel deck. His hands were fused with the ship's railing. The most terrifying thing was that he was still conscious. Martinez shouted, "Help me! I can't get out! The ship is pulling me in!" Engine Room Chief Chen was in an even worse state. The upper half of his body was embedded in the engine room wall. Only his head and chest were visible. Chief Chen was screaming, "How is this possible? I'm inside the metal, but I can breathe!" Commander Hayes was trying to stop the experiment on the bridge. The radio wasn't working. The compasses were spinning wildly, and all the navigation devices had gone haywire. Hayes shouted into the void, "Crew, report!" The voices echoed like a hallucination. "Commander, help! I can't get out. Where are we? Where is this place? There are other things on the ship, other beings." Hayes's blood ran cold. Other beings. What does that mean? There was no longer just the crew on board. Shadows were moving. But these shadows were not normal beings. They were moving among the sailors. Sailor Thompson heard footsteps behind him as he walked down a corridor. When he turned around, he saw no one. But the sound continued. "Who's there?" he shouted. The response came in a voice that was familiar, yet completely foreign. "We came with you." Thompson's hair stood on end. The voice sounded like his missing friend Martinez, but it was different. The most terrifying thing was that time seemed to be warping. Some sailors were reliving the same moment over and over again. Sailor Johnson was trying to go down the same stairs, but every time he started, he ended up back where he began. "This is impossible," he shouted. "I've been on these stairs for 5 minutes." Others were moving quickly. They were aging as if hours had passed. Their hair was turning white. Their faces were wrinkling. Sailor Adams was shocked when he looked in the mirror. This morning he was 22 years old. Now he looked like he was 40. The USS Eldridge was no longer just a ship. It had become a living entity. The steel walls were breathing. The corridors were expanding and contracting. The doors were opening and closing on their own. The ship had begun to speak to its crew. "We are protecting you. Stay safe. We are one. We cannot be separated. This is your home. Forever." On the pier, Dr. Franklin was helpless. The generators were still running, but he couldn't control them. "Press the emergency shut-off button," he shouted. The technicians pressed the button, but nothing happened. The machine continued to operate on its own. "This is impossible. How can the machine operate on its own?" Dr. Wells suddenly noticed something. "Dr. Franklin, look!" A greenish mist was rippling on the water. It was as if something was trying to return. And suddenly, with a terrifying roar, the USS Eldridge reappeared. But this was a different ship. Its hull was twisted and bent, as if reshaped by some unseen force. Its colors had changed. A terrifying silence fell. Dr. Franklin stood up in fear. "Board the ship! Now! Check the crew!" he shouted. The first team to board the ship felt their stomachs churn. The ship no longer smelled like normal metal. It smelled like rotten meat. The search and rescue team encountered horrific scenes on the ship's deck. Some sailors were embedded in the ship's steel structure. Parts of their bodies had fused with the metal, but the most terrifying thing was that some of them were still alive. Sailor Martinez was found embedded in the railing. His legs were fused with the steel bars, but he could still speak. "Get me out!" he pleaded. "Please get me out! The ship is pulling me!" The search team leader reported over the radio. "Command center, this is a graveyard. Half the crew is buried in the ship." The most terrifying discovery was made on the ship's bridge. Commander Hayes was standing at the captain's chair, but he wasn't standing. He was fused to the chair, but his eyes were open, and he could speak. As the search team approached him, Hayes whispered, We weren't there, but something was with us. Commander, where were you? Another place, a dark place, and there were others like us." Hayes's voice trailed off. The next day, the USS Eldridge was gone. According to official records, the ship had been taken to another shipyard for routine maintenance. Half of the crew had lost their lives in a maritime accident. The rest were being treated for psychological trauma. Dr. Franklin sat in his private office, staring blankly at the wall. He was writing the report for the 4th time. Each time he wrote a different version. "The experimental radar blackout test has failed." He knew he had to write lies. Sharing the truth would turn the world upside down. The surviving sailors were lying silently in hospital wards. They weren't talking. They couldn't talk. Sailor Bradley was sitting on his bed, repeating the same movements over and over. He was opening and closing his hands, as if trying to grasp something. The hospital doctor was reporting to Dr. Stevens. "We're calling it post-traumatic stress disorder, but this is different. They act as if they're still somewhere else." "What do you mean?" Sometimes they talk to things that aren't there, and they all whisper the same thing." "What?" "We came back, but they came with us." November 1st, 1943, Washington, D.C. Restricted area. A high-level meeting was taking place at the Pentagon. Only 3 people were at the table. What was discussed would not be recorded anywhere. "How will we handle the Philadelphia incident?" asked the first man. "It will be completely covered up. All documents will be destroyed. Witnesses will be silenced." "What about the scientists?" "Dr. Franklin has been assigned to another project. Dr. Wells, unfortunately, had an accident." Silence fell. "Will we try this technology again?" "No, at least not for now. But we will keep the documents, perhaps in the future." 1951. Naval Archives. 8 years later, a young archive clerk stumbled upon an old file while sorting through documents. USS Eldridge, Project Rainbow, top secret. When he opened the file, his hands began to shake. The photographs inside. How could this be possible? A ship in a semi-transparent state, human silhouettes burned into steel plates, and the most terrifying of all, photographs of people who had been reduced to shadows. The archivist immediately took the file to his superior. The next day, both the file and the archivist disappeared. The surviving sailors lived strange lives for years afterward. Sailor Bradley was working in a factory in New York in 1955, but his co-workers were saying strange things about him. "Sometimes it's like he's not even there," one said. "You're talking, but it's like he can't hear you." And his relationship with the metals. When he touches the metal pieces, it's like he's talking to them. Bradley himself noticed it too. Some days, he could only see half of himself in the mirror. Other days, he couldn't see himself at all. In 1963, Bradley disappeared. He left only a note at home. "They are calling me. I must return." In 1978, retired Navy officer Charles Moore began his own investigation. He collected old documents, witness statements, and hospital records. And he discovered a terrifying truth. The USS Eldridge incident was not unique. Similar experiments had been conducted at least 7 more times between 1943 and 1951. Different ships, different locations, but the result was always the same. Each time, the survivors whispered the same words. "They came with us." As Moore's research was about to be published in 1979, a mysterious fire broke out in his home. All the documents were destroyed. Moore himself disappeared that night. Over the years, strange incidents began to be reported worldwide. Sailors reported seeing ghost ships in the oceans. These ships would appear and disappear, and on them, shapes resembling humans were moving. In 2003, a fishing boat in the Bermuda Triangle reported encountering an old-style destroyer. The ship was marked USS Eldridge, but according to official records, no such ship existed. Robert Chen, 95, was the former chief engineer of the USS Eldridge. He was the last surviving witness. Before his death, he told his grandson, "Son, something changed in the world that day. We didn't just become invisible. We opened the door to another dimension." His grandson replied, "What kind of dimension, Grandpa?" "The dark one, and those in that dimension. They became aware of our existence in this world. Since that day, the boundary between us has weakened." Chen whispered his final words. "The USS Eldridge will return. And this time, it won't come alone." Even today, former workers at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard report seeing strange things. At night, shadows move along the pier. Sometimes, familiar sounds can be heard coming from the sea. And the strangest thing, on some nights, the silhouette of an old-fashioned destroyer appears on the water. It's semi-transparent and looks like a dream. Local fishermen know about this. They don't go out to sea on those nights. Have you ever wondered, could what happened on that ship be real? The story of the USS Eldridge doesn't end here. This was just the beginning. Every day, new scientific experiments are conducted around the world. Particle accelerators, dimensional research, quantum experiments. Could one of today's experiments repeat the mistake made in 1943? Are we creating other USS Eldridges? And most importantly, are entities of that dimension seeking new opportunities to enter our world? What did this story teach you? What is the cost of pushing the boundaries of science? And would you participate in such an experiment? This story may be fiction or reality, but one thing is certain. Human curiosity and scientific ambition can sometimes spiral out of control. The USS Eldridge may be the most terrifying example of this. What do you think? Is there a chance this story could be true? I look forward to your comments. And remember, if you ever see a strange ship at sea, don't get too close, because some losses are never recovered. May God be with you wherever you are.